To go electrify one home, you're probably looking at 150 to 200 hours of human investment. And then you realize we have like 1/4 of the workforce we need. Wholesale, you need to just decrease the amount of time spent to go electrify all these homes. We think that the purchasing process is the best opportunity to actually go do that. The folks that have the operational expertise don't have any of the technical expertise or the capital to actually go attack that problem. You see a bunch of technologists jump into the space going, hey, like, I know a lot about technology. This industry hasn't had any efficiency gains. Like, I'm going to go tackle that. And then they get humbled pretty quickly because they don't actually understand what customers need. Having been a contractor and having an email box that's just riddled with people trying to get in touch with you so they can pull dollars out of your pocket, I didn't want to be another one of those people. My shield was up all the time about someone trying to sell me something. We really are trying to make both these people's lives a lot better by just deleting an experience that really just doesn't even need to exist today.
Welcome to the Plucky Bamboo Podcast, where we get into the real stories and strategies behind scaling sustainability-focused businesses. Today, I'm joined by Gunnison, founder of Zero Homes, a company on a mission to make home upgrades radically easier, cheaper, and smarter, so that millions more people can electrify where they live. In this episode, we get into the practical challenges that most founders overlook, like why the homeowner upgrade experience is so broken, what that reveals about tackling legacy industries, what it really takes to build consumer software when customer acquisition costs will kill you before you even launch, and the impossible scale of electrifying 60 million homes in the US alone to fight the climate crisis, and how Grant thinks about solving it without burning out people or capital. If you're working on tough systems problems, selling into old markets, or even just trying to scale something that's actually useful, this one is for you. Let's get into it. Hey Grant, thank you so much for joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and Zero Homes?
Yeah, well, hey, Chris, thanks for having me on the show today. Maybe I'll start with Zero Homes and what we're up to. So, we're really trying to be the next generation home improvement platform. We are really trying to take what is today a really arduous, hard task to make it as easy as possible for homeowners and contractors to get work done. That's sort of an interesting thing to go tackle. And a lot of why I'm working on that has a lot to do with my own personal background. So maybe we'll jump into that for a minute. So my personal background, I grew up in Southern California in Orange County. Grew up in a construction family. Dad was out in the field when I was in third, fourth grade. I was learning how to use skill saws and table saws and everything else when I was in fifth grade, kind of thing. So that sort of was deep in the family, like DNA in a lot of ways. After my undergrad, I actually went back to run the family business for a couple of years. And while my background's in technology, software, electronics, etc., I sort of knew enough to be dangerous, I guess, in that world. So I'll say, like, there's kind of a rich story there, and I'm happy to get into more. But my personal background, like deep in construction, both in the ops and sales side, and then I spent, 8 years in college and several of those years in a research lab doing space systems and software and electronics design. So have that sort of perspective of the world as well.
Let's start with the problem. What pain point in the homeowner experience made you say this needs to change?
Yeah, maybe I'll tell a personal story in that as well. So the high level problem is it's very difficult as a homeowner to understand how to solve a problem in your house. And that could look like anything from I have high utility bills to I got a broken window or dishwasher or, I want to get my floors redone or whatever. Tackling any of these problems it's not so obvious, like how to get to a solution and what it should cost and, what the different options are and whatnot. And that sort of challenge ends up in a lot of ways having homeowners find contractors, have them come over to meet with them, discuss the challenges, look at what the actual issue is with everyone in the room. And what that turns into is a really laborious sales process. Both for the homeowner, they're going to spend 5, 6, 8 hours having folks come over. The truth is, no one really loves having a stranger in their house. And even those sales folks, don't really, want to be in strangers' homes and poking around every nook and cranny. And, of course, there's some fun stories to tell in that I've had. But I think at the end of the day, this is it's a really, really bad purchasing experience to do home upgrades. And I was in that, world for a while. I did hundreds of home visits. So I just have a very strong, first person experience doing this and realized that if we wanted to go solve the problems that we're trying to tackle today and trying to go electrify all these homes and realizing that's a really, really massive problem. We got to streamline the process and make it easy, And so what we're trying to do ultimately is like wholesale delete the in-home sales visit experience and put that into, a digital experience that can make it really easy for homeowners to get the advice they want, get pricing, connect with a contract, get financing, etc. But then on the contractor side, also, like, let's just make their lives easier. Like I didn't love the experience of going and meeting with all these folks from the perspective of that. It was just like extremely expensive and very inefficient. I love people. And so going and meeting with a bunch of strangers is something I'm very comfortable with, but ultimately it's a hard lifestyle. You're grinding hard many hours and you kind of only get to eat what you kill, so to speak. So all to say, like, there are definitely massive benefits to both the sales people's day-to-day lives, but also the contracting businesses in general to make them a lot easier. So maybe to like wrap that full circle is we really are trying to make both of these lives and both these people's lives a lot better by just deleting an experience that really just doesn't even need to exist today.
Tell me a bit about that then. Was there a specific moment when you realized tech could completely change how that kind of stuff happens? Or was it more like an organic process? Like you knew there was a problem, how can we solve it?
Yeah, well, a little bit of both, actually. I mean, I think when I was running my dad's business, like I had a pretty visceral reaction to, going and driving around Southern California hours on end. I don't know if you've ever been to Southern California, but the freeways are 8 lanes wide on each side and they're packed full of cars. I mean, it's just like enormous amounts of traffic, and driving 30, 45 minutes one way to meet with someone is really expensive and time consuming. And so I think after doing hundreds of those reps, I was just, especially with the technologist that I am, there's got to be a better way to solve this. That was in like 2016, 17, 18, right? I don't know, iPhone 5 or 6, maybe 7 or something at that point, but still like, not in the modern phones that we have today. And all to say, the sensing capabilities of those phones were not capable enough to solve this problem then. The thought certainly crossed my mind, but it wasn't until like several years later I realized that you could actually like build the solution to solve this problem, and that the technology, the hardware, was actually capable of doing it as well. And so anyways, I think I had a lot of that left pain in the back of my mind that, later came out when we were building these small satellites. I used to work on laser comm and Earth imaging systems, and, building satellites that are not much bigger than like 2 Kleenex boxes, and they're like very, very small. The sensors we were using there to do Earth imaging were basically the same performance sensors that were in your cell phone. We were doing some really interesting, feature extraction of photos. I realized like, well, wait a minute. If every homeowner already has one of these smartphones, couldn't we just put some software on their phone so we could collect the information we need? And then I wouldn't have to, I wouldn't have had to drive to all those homeowners' houses, and they wouldn't have had to host, myself and or the, dozens of other contractors that were in their home. So a little bit of, personal experience, and then a little bit of an aha moment, but not for 3, 4 years later.
I think I still had an Android at that point, let alone an iPhone. Um, what? Why do you feel like no one else has come up with this kind of solution before? Because it feels like it's a really legacy industry. It feels like it's quite traditional. It feels like, and obviously now we have the technology to be able to do it, but why do you feel like you're one of the first to market with this?
I've been asking myself that for a long time. I think in some respects, it seems so obvious to me, right? That, of course, why don't we build a system like this that's a homeowner facing piece of software that can solve a really, really awful customer experience today? And at least here are my answers to that. I don't know if these are true, but I think it's a couple of things. The first is building consumer facing software in the building home improvement industry has proven to be very challenging. There hasn't really been any company to date that has been successful doing that. Part of the reason for that is there's like a pretty substantial financial barrier to that. Like if you want to go build a product, you need thousands of users to go through it to really build a robust system. And to acquire those customers in HVAC, let's say as an example, it costs you $1,500 to $2,000 a customer to acquire all those folks. So if you want to go acquire 10,000 customers, it's going to cost you 15 to 20 million bucks. That's a pretty tough pill to swallow economically, to then even have the opportunity to go build a product that's, consumer facing in that way. Now, of course, you don't have to pick HVAC, and maybe there's some lower acquisition products that you could target, but for a lot of reasons that's where we sit today in HVAC. So that's kind of the reason for that specific analogy. That's one perspective. I think maybe another perspective is the folks that have the operational expertise to actually build a product that would be really loved by homeowners are the contractors, right? Like they know deeply what homeowners are looking for in homes, but those businesses are also like woefully undercapitalized. Investors are more or less like allergic to investing in them because, frankly, they're they're low margin businesses that aren't amazing and really complex and hard to grow. And so in a lot of ways, you sort of have this tension of saying, well, the folks that have the operational expertise actually don't have any of the technical expertise or the capital to actually go attack that problem. And so in some respects, it's sort of this disjointed group of folks. You see a bunch of technologists jump into the space going, hey, like, I know a lot about technology. This industry hasn't had any efficiency gains. Like, I'm going to go tackle that. And then they get humbled pretty quickly because they don't actually understand what customers need. And so, anyways, I see those two groups in a lot of ways struggling with this problem. And remarkably enough, I'm exactly like the overlap in the Venn diagram, you know, that I sort of see both sides of that. And, I just don't think there are very many people with that background. So, anyways, I think those are a couple of answers. There's maybe a third is in that like it's really difficult to build in this space. And I say that with the perspective of there really hasn't been very many companies that have gotten very large and been really successful in this space. And I think that's really just a symptom of the difficulty and that many people have tried. The graveyard is very large. And so I think in a lot of ways, it's a significant challenge.
Why the electrification part of it? Why the sustainability part of it?
Yeah. Um, well, I think for me, you know, growing up, it was very like ingrained to just have a purpose-driven life. And I think in a lot of ways that has sort of turned my viewpoint towards how can I solve big problems that help other people. I think in a lot of ways there's this nice cross section of challenges in this space where I happen to know a lot about construction. I happen to know and understand the technology that needs to be built to go solve that problem. If you do solve that problem, it also sort of opens the door to solving the climate problem in homes in a really sort of unique way. In that you need to be able to help homeowners understand that all these electric appliances are actually higher performing and better for them. And we need to make it a lot easier to make that happen. And that's sort of really interesting opportunity to go then solve the climate problem in homes. And, we need to go electrify like 60 million homes. This is this mind-bogglingly large challenge to go tackle. And you have to do that kind of one homeowner at a time, right? And so you sort of look at that and you go, well, this is a really cool opportunity to go improve people's lives one at a time in a very material way, saving them a lot of money, making their lives more comfortable, so on and so forth, but then also getting to go solve this macro problem. And I think that to me just I was really excited by that, going, I think I have a unique perspective on this. The problem opportunity is enormous. If you can actually solve that problem, like, wow, you really have a really cool way to impact the world. At the same time, you can go help Mrs. Jones, go solve her particular like comfort challenge, right? And so there's, I think, opportunities across the board that just get me excited about it every day to wake up and work hard to go make it happen.
Let's talk about that side of things then. So the homeowner contractor thing. Most companies in the space that are about making it better for contractors are aimed at contractors. Obviously, you're focused on the homeowner side instead. What
Yeah.
made you commit to that approach?
Yeah, I think having been a contractor and having an email box that's just riddled with people trying to, get in touch with you so they can pull dollars out of your pocket. I didn't want to be another one of those people. I mean, I think a lot of software providers in this space are building solutions that are lead gen platforms. They're sales enablement tools, they're CRMs or ERP systems, which in a lot of ways are meant to be helpful to contractors and help them drive some efficiency and some scale. But they all come with the fact that you got to pay for them. And I think I quickly realized, having been a business owner in that space, like my shield was up all the time about someone trying to sell me something. And, I kind of knew what the core problems were in my business and what I needed to go tackle. And it all just became incredible amounts of noise. And so as I looked at the space, I was like, at the end of the day, if you want to go build those solutions, yes, they help. Yes, there are good businesses to be built there, but you're only going to be able to sell to the top few percent of the market where there's enough, human capital in a business to even have a conversation with you about implementing some of these things. The bottom 95% of contractors, which do under 5 million a year, are impossible to get a hold of because they're just like drowning in work all the time. And so in order to go build a big business, something like Service Titan, it's really, really difficult to get folks time to be able to go actually sell to them. And so I just thought that that was a really challenging entry point. And even though I have all the empathy in the world for those folks, I just want to help them solve a problem in a different way, as opposed to trying to build be their next CRM or their next what have you. I just want to be job generation for these guys. Like, let me make it easier for you to do more revenue, and I don't want to ask you for anything, basically.
I think it's a really interesting lesson there for a lot of people listening. It can be really easy to get stuck in the old way of doing things for a certain industry if you enter into it. Like everyone feels like contracts is the way you've got to go. But in your case, you saw actually it's the other side of it. Just look at different ways that you can approach a market.
One other comment around that as well is like, I think my sort of general thesis on this space, again, if you want to go solve the macro problem, you do need a money gusher of a business, right? And I think one of the challenges, again, with SaaS tools is that they're extremely low value capture. We're talking sub 1%, maybe even sub 0.5% of the total ticket. And that's not enough gross revenue as a business to actually go grow quickly in a space. And so I think in a lot of ways also looking at what's necessary in order to go solve what I'll call, again, a 60 million building challenge is that you need a lot of gross revenue to grow a big business. And that means you need significant value capture. And solving for the homeowner enables you to be first in line to access the core wallet or the core funding mechanism for the entire industry. And so I said, okay, look, of course, it's really, really hard to go solve for the homeowner. In fact, there's not a single example, really, of a successful company doing that. Maybe I'll call myself crazy, but if you can go do that well, you also are first in line for value capture, which is, I think, a necessary component to going and building a big business here. Now, of course, you got to be careful about how much value you capture because you do want it to be extremely attractive to homeowners and contractors and really all the other stakeholders. So you have to be very mindful of that. But that does put you, in my opinion, in a position to win if you can solve for the homeowner. And turning that back around, then you can go to contractors and give them just an irresistible value proposition saying, hey, would you like to go do this job and I'll pay you $5,000 to do it and, schedule it whenever you have time in your calendar. It's kind of irresistible. I mean, there's not very many reasons why people would turn down that work. And so that's sort of critical because supply in our business from a like network perspective is really, really critical. You don't want fall off there. You really need to maintain that network. And so you need to have an extremely strong value proposition for those guys.
So far, you've grown through utility and channel partnerships. What's been most eye-opening about selling into those kind of organizations as a startup?
I probably had 100 people tell me that it was suicide to try and go do that. And I think for good reason, because, you're selling to some of the largest institutions in the world, people that have billions of dollars of revenue and thousands of people that work at these utilities, and you might be a 3-person startup. I mean, how are you going to possibly convince them that, you're reliable enough to bet on to actually run like a significant program for them that they need to hit some clear KPIs with, and they have regulators watching. I mean, there's a lot of risk there for them to go hire a small firm to go execute against these things. And then also their sales cycles are, probably at the minimum 9 months and at the longest like 36 to 48 months. And so both perspectives there, you kind of look at that and you go, wow, that's a really bad idea. From the perspective of as an early business, you don't have a lot of capital, you need stability and, speed to sale is maybe one of the most important qualities of any channel, especially from a learning perspective. All to say, like in general, it's a terrible idea to go sell to these folks. But I'll caveat that with one critical thing, which is that I didn't see another way to do it. And the reason for that was kind of what I was talking about earlier, in that there's this massive economic barrier to actually going and building a consumer grade platform in this space. And that you need the flow of business to educate you on how to go build that platform appropriately for consumers, meaning that you have to actually deliver the solutions to them. And that means you need to acquire them. And so there's a very significant cost, 15 or 20 million bucks is like roughly what we pen that to being able to build the platform that we want. And so the question becomes, well, how do you actually acquire 15 or 20 million dollars to acquire all the customers? There are like kind of 3 doors, in my opinion. You could go raise that as equity. I think very challenging to do unless you happen to previously been a very successful founder. Raising that amount of cash out of the gate is very, very tough. Option two would be to leverage the profits of a business to then acquire enough customers to eventually grow that quickly. The challenge with that is there's certainly that's not on a timeline that's actually practical if we want to go solve the climate problem. So neither of those doors really work. It seemed like utilities might have been the only option for us, or maybe not specifically utilities, but just upstream partners that would help us distribute our product in front of customers. Also, just happen to have the best unit economics. But yeah, they're very difficult to sell into. So there are a lot of reasons why to not do that. But we did have a few things to our advantage that kind of made that palatable, and then we saw some pretty early wins, and that now is, been great because we're getting a lot of market pull and we haven't really ever run an outbound strategy. So, as we start to do that, this thing is going to really start to snowball, which I think we're pretty excited about.
How did you get those first few partners, not having a big brand, not having a big budget?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I haven't told this story in a while. You got to kiss some frogs, you gotta be willing to do work that no one else wants to do. So, I mean, the very beginning, Um, actually, I participated in this design competition that the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center put on to design a net zero building out of an existing one. They had in the Boston area, they have these triple decker style buildings, and there's tens of thousands of them. Um, and they're pretty simple structures, 3 stories directly on top of each other with typically a unconditioned basement. And I wrote a little piece of software to solve that design problem and submitted my submission to that. And I won, I think like $10,000 or $15,000, which at the time I was like, my God, I've never seen this amount of money in my life. So that's amazing. And then a few months later, one of the implementers in the area actually called me up and said, hey, they want to run like an implementation project around how to get to net zero in buildings, and saw that you did a pretty good submission there. Would you help build a piece of software that could help put together a plan like what you did, but for every homeowner that we interact with? And I said, okay, great. Like, this is actually a perfect opportunity to then build a consumer facing product that utilities could pay for. And that would be an interesting entry point into the market. Of course, I sold that product at a severe loss just to be able to, basically participate and learn. And the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center's got a decent brand to it. And that enabled me to go sell my first city contract for, I think it was like $7,000 or something, like embarrassingly small. But then having a couple more of those under our belt and having, maybe 100 or a couple hundred assessments under our belt at that point, we're then able to sell a slightly bigger contract. And I've just kind of worked my way up from, five or $10,000 prize to a very small contract to a little bit of a bigger one, and sort of just slowly proven that we can actually deliver well. And that also comes with the fact that I bootstrapped for 18 months at the beginning of this, but we were able to sign a couple of early contracts before I took on any venture money, and had a product that was in the field. I think to this day, I'm still embarrassed about how bad it was, but it was good enough to deliver some value. And that's maybe all that sort of mattered at that point.
So then you mentioned just now that you're starting to, I guess, go more outbound. So how are you approaching that without blowing your customer acquisition costs out of the water and going through your entire runway?
Yeah. Well, starting to go outbound to utility partners. And I would say we're just now sort of dipping our toe in that. And that's sort of off the back of, we've now signed a number of brand name partners. So the largest utility in the country just came in on our cap table. We're about to sign a partnership with one of their investor-owned utilities, and that'll be the first investor-owned utility for us. But that, and then a few other larger partners, have enabled us to have sort of the Rolodex to prove that we're worthy of being hired to run these programs. And so we now think we have the legs to stand on. Also a product that, has very high NPS scores and customers love, and it shows itself quite well to these partners. So I think we now have the tools in the tool bag to be able to go run an outbound strategy. But I think up until this point, much like I felt as a business owner, being not harassed, but like having a lot of folks come to me trying to sell me stuff, I feel that empathy for the folks that run these residential programs. I'm sure they are getting hammered all the time with, hey, here's a new widget, here's this, here's that. And so just being very mindful of what the value proposition needs to look like in order for them to get excited about a product, and haven't really felt like we've had, a product that's up to snuff really to do that. And so I think I've been fortunate to have our existing customers both renew their contracts and, double their contracts almost every time. And then also just speak well of us to their friends in the industry as well. And that's kind of helped us, grow our partnerships over the last, year or two.
Talk me through why you feel that the software needs to be improved then, because you said you got a really high NPS score. Last I heard was 83, which is insane. Uh, what are you hoping the new version unlock?
Well, the dreams are big, Chris. I mean, I think what we have proven to date is that we can build the digital twin of a home using your smartphone, and that we can then put together design specs using our design platform to then be able to quote projects for you. The first two components of that, I'll tell you that they're very hard technically to accomplish, but they don't really deliver the full value proposition that a homeowner needs. The homeowner needs a price for their project. They need a scope of work, they need an installer, and they need financing. And our ambition is to automate all of that. And so, in just a few minutes through a smartphone, you can get, an accurate quote that will spit out design specs that a contractor could use to install your project. So there's a lot of room to run there, meaning that fortunately the bar is extremely low in this space. There aren't a lot of products today that are doing things that I would say are like very meaningfully innovative. There are a lot of like incremental gains, but we're trying to wholesale change an entire workflow for the industry. And I think even being able to prove that that's possible at a first pass delivers a really great customer experience. But we just think we have so much room to run on that. And as a consumer, I would love to be able to get instant pricing 24/7, 365. What actually needs to happen in order to make that happen is very significant. We have large ambitions, and we're just not nearly where we think this product has the potential to be. It's just got a very high ceiling, and we're just early in the days of building it.
So the goal is to electrify 60 million homes. What has to be true for that to happen, either for the market or for your team?
Well, I mean, let's take a top-down perspective quickly, which is in order to go electrify one home, you're probably looking at like 150 to 200 hours of human investment and time to go pull off one of those projects. Quickly do the math on like 60 million times 200 or something, and it turns into a mind-boggling number. You can back that into like how many human years you need, and then you realize we have like 1/4 of the workforce we need to actually like execute on that. And so I think from one perspective, you sort of look at that and you go, okay, well, it's actually maybe an impossible task unless you change a few key dynamics. And so you said what needs to be true. We actually just need to strip out like a very meaningful amount of time to complete these projects, at least cutting the amount of human investment by 50%. Right. And so that was one of the original reasons why we wanted to go solve for the consumer. And that if you could actually remove a dozen, 2 dozen contracting visits, well, heck, there's like 3 dozen hours right there that you can just get rid of, right? And that's maybe like one of the biggest chunks that you can actually delete, right? And so sort of looking at it from a system level perspective, that has to be true if you even want to have a chance, because the likelihood that you get a doubling of the workforce, that's pretty tough unless you can start paying folks a lot more money. I don't know where you're going to find the margin for that today, right? And so you need to somehow rejigger the economics of the industry in order to entice enough people to do that. Um, but there are some other opportunities. As an example, you can make the heat pump installation process a lot easier so that plumbers could also do it. It's not just HVAC technicians. You might actually double the workforce in that way. Um, there are some other opportunities, but I think the most important thing is that wholesale, you need to just decrease the amount of time spent to go electrify all these homes. We think that the purchasing process is the best opportunity to actually go do that. And that's why we're in many ways focused directly on this specific opportunity.
What do you think is going to be the biggest challenge to your growth over the next year?
Well, I would say this. I think we have more opportunities in front of us today than we can go execute on, which is a great place to be as an early business, meaning that there are more partners that want us to go work with them than we can sign. And the limiting factor there really is our balance sheet. And so that's a very fortunate place to be, where as we're rapidly growing revenue, the business needs more working capital. We need more people on the team to be able to go execute against those things. And so as someone who's leading the business, I have to go figure out how to solve some of those challenges. And up until recently, that hasn't been a material challenge of saying, oh, wow, we need to really project working capital, and we need to like really scrutinize our cash cycles on these projects so that we don't have working capital need to explode all of a sudden in the business. And what are our key risks to that happening? And how can we keep our eyes on those and maybe even take a few steps to reduce those risks? So that's maybe one answer in saying that I would love to say yes and be a little bit more ambitious with signing new partners, but we just don't have the capital to do that today. So we do need to get a fundraise done. And I think that's always challenging. I think there's always folks in the, in the market that will say, oh man, it's a really challenging time to raise. I would even say in 21, 22, when like the venture hype cycle was really, really moving, people were still saying it was hard to raise at that point, which is just one way to say that if you want to go be a venture-backed company and go try to create a business that's worthy of venture ambitions, you have to go through financings that are challenging. And you also need to find good partners that see the world the same way that you do and want to go build a business that's ideologically aligned with the problems you're trying to solve. So I'm in the middle, squarely in the middle of that at the moment. It's both fun to go tackle those types of problems, financing the business, but it is also like a very material governor to our own ambitions and growth. And so, um, I wish I had a bigger balance sheet. There are definitely more opportunities we'd like to go attack today than we can, but hopefully we can solve that problem in short order and go back to having fun.
I'm curious, because this is such a new concept, what's been the hardest part about messaging it to homeowners?
Well, that's an interesting conversation in and of itself. When a homeowner, yeah, I mean, literally, we are inventing an entirely new modality to solve like an age-old problem, right? Let's just take a water heater as an example. The casing cracks, it's leaking all over the floor. Someone's like, "Oh no, that's an urgent problem," both because it's a flooding issue and because I hate taking cold showers, right? And so people go, "Okay, quick, like let's go to Google," and they'll say "plumber near me," and they'll get a whole bunch of listings about who's within 5 miles of their home. That is starkly different than, "Hey, let me get out my phone and take a few pictures of this water heater and get an instant price on a new water heater," right? Um, that is the messaging challenge we're up against to like educate the populace that there's a better, faster, cheaper way to solve their problem than to find a bunch of contractors, have them drive over to your house for, an hour at a time, and then you can kind of figure out how to then start moving forward with solving your problem. That in many ways is the messaging challenge of this business. And another key reason why we've chosen to go through partners is that they bear that burden for us. We don't have to do marketing. We really just have to help folks understand once they come into the program that there's a better way to solve their problem than having a bunch of contractors come over. So that's maybe the shortest way to just say that we've tried to actually not tackle that problem up until just recently, where we think our product is decent enough that we could actually start to go really try to push outside of some of these utility programs and even do some of the marketing on our partners' behalves. So we are now trying to tackle that. But I mean, for the first 3 years of this business, we tried to ignore that as much as possible, fully well knowing we we have to go solve it. But really, like, we had to go prove the technology worked and prove that you could like actually deliver something with quality and people like that. And now it's like, great. Now, how do we communicate that there's a better way to get this stuff done?
Grant, my final question for you. If you have one piece of advice for another founder in sustainability, what would it be?
Just keep going. This can be very hard. You have to have like, I don't know, 3 or 4 standard deviations of resilience above above the average human, and you need to find the key value proposition that your customers really want you to solve. And until you do, you're just going to get punched in the face a lot. So be ready for that, and try to provide the best possible value proposition to your customers.
How is it people can find out more about Zero Homes, get involved, contact you, whatever it might be?
Yeah, totally. We got some public pages, not very many of them because we try to not do marketing, but LinkedIn, our homepage, it's zerohomes.io.
Grant, thank you very much for your time today. It's been a great conversation. I think you're doing a really interesting thing. And yeah, I hope it continues to grow.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, great to be on, and it's awesome.